we have already talked about the dramatic political changes that come to that come to the globe in the 20th century. The massive wars, the ethnic cleansing and the crises, the border changes of nations, the Cold War. We've talked about all that already. Now we're going to talk about technology and medicine and the human impacts on the environment. This is all from Key Concept 6.1, so we're going through the whole thing today. We start off with all of the positives, all the wonderful things that human beings have done in the 20th century to bring us more closely together with each other. And first we're going to talk about different modes of transportation and communication that will be advanced in the 20th century that virtually eliminate the issue of the world being big. If you guys remember from AP US History last year, when our country was founded, you know, when we're talking in the 18th and the 19th century, most Americans never ventured more than a few miles from their birthplace. You kind of stayed in your own local community for your entire life. I would venture to say that every single person in this classroom has been out of the state, right? Raise your hand if you've never been out of the state of Michigan. Okay, that's good. Has anybody, raise your hand if you've never been out of the country of the United States. Canada counts. They're like a different country. Canada counts. Okay, but you are going to India this summer, right? So you're taking care of that pretty seriously. So anyway, the world has gotten, we say the world has gotten much smaller. Literally, no, the world is the exact same size it used to be, but it's so much easier to get from point A to point B due to a lot of these 20th century technologies. First, the automobile. Here we have a picture of Henry Ford's Model T plant in Highland Park, Michigan.
Was it Michigan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were a pretty big deal back in the day. All right. The automobile is actually going to be invented in the late 19th century, but it becomes revolutionized in the 20th century with Henry Ford and his assembly line. You guys maybe want to keep that in the back of your mind as well. The assembly line, the idea of the assembly line is a 20th century idea. It's taking the specialization that comes out of the factory system of the 19th century, if you recall talking about that, where we would have just individual workers doing one small individual part of each bigger product. Well, the assembly line is a continuation and adaptation to that idea, and it simply moves the parts to the worker. So a worker does not physically have to move himself. The parts, the car, the pieces will make their way to him. So he can literally stay in the same place, and in front of him every minute or eventually within seconds, new products will come in front of him that he just does the same repetitive action to. Henry Ford does it for the assembly line, and then every other manufacturing process follows Henry Ford's lead. It does it for the automobile industry, I should say. Every other manufacturing process follows his lead. The automobile, of course, revolutionized in the United States by Henry Ford because he actually paid his workers enough money where his workers could afford his car. By the mid-20th century, we're going to see a huge boom in the auto industry as the interstate highway system is developed by the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s. Yes. So in the 1950s, with the development in the United States of the interstate highway system, we are going to connect disparate cities across the country by highways like they've never been connected before. So now you can start in Michigan and hop on I-75, as you guys all know, and end up down in Florida, or you can get on I-94 and head over to Chicago. So we connect disparate parts of the country through our highways. We're, of course, not the only nation to do this. Maybe most famously, the German Autobahn. It's the German highway system, but every nation is going to have their own highway system that stretches multi-lane highways for fast automobile travel and truck travel for the movement of goods across their nations. Also need to talk about the development of the airplane. This is a 20th century invention. Here are the Wright brothers on the beach in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in 1903. With the first successful manned air flight. And here you see, I can't remember, was it Orville Wright, I believe, was the guy that was actually on it? That's Wilbur, I think. But anyway, That's where he is. So you can see that for this first flight, we're not really doing much with this aircraft besides getting off the ground. But by the First World War, air power becomes a player in modern warfare. And by the 1920s and 1930s, we start to see air travel between cities becoming a viable option, as you can actually now begin to fit more people and more cargo into planes. They can travel further. And I was playing around a little bit this morning. There's a number of sites that do this, but this is a website that tracks all of the flights currently in the sky. This was done at about 8 o'clock this morning. You guys can see how prepared I am when I put these PowerPoints together. Really, really ahead of the game. And you can see at about 8 o'clock in the morning where each plane was in or over the Detroit area. And you can even, like on the website, hover over each individual plane and find out what it is and where it's going to. And you can see there's big planes and there's little planes and there's all sorts of planes. But as we zoom back, as we take a look at the United States and planes coming over from Europe, we can see that there are hundreds and hundreds of airplanes in the sky at any given time. Or we take another step back to get the whole global picture. And why this is so interesting is you not only see how many planes are in the sky at any one moment, you also, one, get the idea that, yes, the Earth is round. It's actually faster to fly in this, like, archway rather than flying straight across the map, because why go across the fattest part of the globe, right? And then we can also see where the development on the planet is. And I think this map really shows that pretty clearly, how Africa has so comparatively few flights going across it compared to Europe or the United States. Or Southeast Asia, or South Asia, yes, absolutely. So the airplane, huge. Development in technology in the area of communication is also going to have tremendous advancement in the 20th century. The phone, again, the telephone was actually invented in the late 19th century, but it will start gaining wide use in the United States and in Western Europe and eventually in Asia into the 20th century. So here is a flapper in the 1920s talking on a telephone, and here is Zach Morris in the 1990s talking on now a cordless, or even, that's probably a cellular telephone. Very exciting stuff here.
What part of the 20th century? Like the early or?
Yeah, well, it was invented in the late 19th century, I believe in 1879.
Like what was it popularized?
But popularized into the 20th century, 1920s and 30s. And I liked this little graphic I came across. So we've got the evolution of phones from its invention in 1876, I take that back, all the way to our smartphones and then our watches and then whatever's going to be coming next. So fun stuff.
Technology.
It's great. And so now we've gone now within barely over a century from the only way to communicate over disparate, or actually if we go back about 150 years, predating the telegraph, right, when we're sending messages via wires strung across long areas, and we're sending Morse code messages of dots and dashes to convey ideas. Before that, we had to literally have a guy go from one place to another with a message. And now we can communicate with people anywhere on the planet via wireless technology, and it's pretty incredible. Also have to discuss the evolution of the internet, bringing people together. And I think you guys noticed a couple questions on your AP exam the other day that we hadn't really talked about yet. But did you also notice how just because you're alive in the modern world, you kind of can get those questions? That's why we don't freak ourselves out about these last days of AP World History. So you guys have lived through some of this, but what you probably don't recognize is the internet actually predates even me. And it was developed as a technology used by our military, first and foremost, to better communicate with each other. And then it was in the mid-90s that we start to see the advent of what we call the World Wide Web and commercial internet. I like that phrasing. And you guys start to recognize some of these names that were so, like when I was in college, when you went online, you would be going on Netscape, which doesn't even exist anymore. No one uses such thing. Yahoo's still hanging in there somehow. But Yeah, Google's born in 98, 99? And then what is going to come? Well, we've already been in 2014, so what big things have you guys come across that should probably be added to this list? Snapchat, sure. What is that? That's Instagram, right? Yeah, I don't use that. The Adobe Cast. The Adobe Cast would be right in here. It's pretty big.
Any podcast goes right there.
The point is, and if you guys don't experience this and don't recognize what a big deal it is, for example, Amazon being born in the mid-90s as just a forum to buy books originally, and now you can buy anything. When my family, we use an Amazon Prime membership, like to no end, to where it is even cheaper for me. Like if I know my dog food, we're almost out of it, and I just have to click a little button on my phone, and in 2 days, a big heavy bag of dog food is going to be delivered to my porch for cheaper than I could even get driving to Kroger to pick up that dog food. It blows our minds, all right? And now Amazon, you guys have probably read about how they're starting in some cities on the West Coast, I think up in Seattle and such, to deliver products via drones and like literally dropping things off via unmanned aircraft to people's front porches. It's really an incredible world we live in. And what we really want to recognize here is that despite the fact that we've talked this year about 10,000 years of human history, the changes that even this have brought us in just the last decade is immense. The world is changing faster than any other time in human history. And you guys are especially equipped to deal with it because you're accustomed to these changes, right? All right. We also see in the 20th century new scientific developments that change our understanding of how the world works around us. The College Board wants me to spend a little time talking about Albert Einstein and his theory of relativity, for which he won a Nobel Prize in physics for. Unfortunately, I'm not smart enough to talk about Albert Einstein and his theory of relativity. Outside to say this. It says, the laws of physics are the same for all observers in uniform motion. Okay, everything kind of works the same if we're all moving the same. But, we find this wacky thing that if like you were to put, if you have two twins born at the same time, and you throw one twin into a spacecraft and start shooting him around the universe, and you keep the other one on Earth, and then eventually you bring that other twin back, he's going to be a little younger than his brother that stayed here on Earth. What? That moving clocks are measured to tick more slowly than an observer's stationary clock. So time moves a little bit more slowly when it's in motion, and if we like explode these into like light year speed kind of things, it could actually have some impact. Yes?
And Ms. talked about this too, and he didn't win the Nobel Prize for this. He won it for photoelectric.
Oh, well, okay. Well, stop making me sound stupid on one of my last lectures of the year. Anyway. Also during the 20th century, we have the development of the Big Bang Theory. A theory of the origin of the universe that is widely accepted today by most astrophysicists as how this all began. And so you can trace back to the billions and billions of years ago where we get the origin of everything. And eventually we like pop on the scene. So yay. The College Board really likes the Green Revolution. I can't remember, and I don't want to talk about specific questions you might have had the other day, but the College Board likes the Green Revolution. And I think you guys, here's a benefit out of the Wayne State lectures we went to the other day, where he talked about how agricultural revolutions, I think too many AP World kids over the years would think that it was just in the Neolithic Revolution that you have to worry about like revolutionary changes in agriculture. But as we heard at Wayne State last week, really it's for all of human history. We're always trying to find better ways to produce more food for more people on the planet. It starts with the Neolithic Revolution, of course, where we begin to start settled agriculture and begin a sedentary lifestyle where we're not moving from place to place. But it pushes all the way through the Industrial Revolution, where we start putting machines onto our farms. And then in the 1950s, we have the beginning of what's known as the Green Revolution.
Pesticides.
Where we begin to use new fertilizers and new pesticides to produce far more food than human beings have ever been able to produce before. And we can see, guys, the average annual from like 1961 to 63 annual production of farmers on each of these continents compared to the averages in the early 90s. And we see dramatic increases, especially in developed nations that have the money to afford these pesticides and these new fertilizers. Asia, by far, the biggest growth in agricultural production. Africa is going to lag behind, but in the last 20 years, it is rapidly catching up. And we can take a look at this chart, too, which I think is really important to understand. This green line, it's the amount of farmland that we have in production. And here's 1961 all the way to today. The amount of farmland that we have in production stays basically the same over the last 50 years. But the production of food, or what we would call the yield, like how much we're producing per chunk of land, that dramatically increases. Human beings have never produced more food than they are producing today. And we will produce more food next year than we are producing today. And what's important also to note, as despite the fact that we have about the same amount of land under cultivation on the planet, far fewer people are involved in producing the food. We are producing food, more food, on the same amount of land with far fewer farmers. Far fewer people devoting their lives to the production of food. I think we started the year like this, or if this was a regular AP World class and I started the year at the beginning, I would have said something like, none of your families are involved, certainly in the community we live in. None of your families are involved in this. Now, you might have a garden out back, but there's no farmer families here, right? A little bit? Your cousin owns a farm, but I'm talking about a nuclear family.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, I'm talking about you guys. Yes?
My dad owns paddy fields for rice.
Your dad owns paddy fields. That does not surprise me. Okay. But anyway, so we have an entire classroom of 37 students in here, and not one of your families, direct families, nuclear families, are connected with the production of the food that we consume. If we were to take this class back to 1900, we'd have a very different story. If we were to take this class back to 1800, you guys wouldn't be in school. You'd be working on the farm. All right? So that'd be ridiculous. All right. We are also going to see some tremendous innovations in medical technology over the 20th century. I'm only going to mention two. First, Jonas Salk and his polio vaccine. One of the many vaccines that you guys get when you're little kids. Or at least that your doctor strongly, in your society, strongly encourages you to get when you're little kids, is the vaccine for polio. You guys might remember that our President Roosevelt, you guys learned about him a little bit last year, President Roosevelt was stricken with polio, and that rendered him paralyzed from the waist down. So President Roosevelt could not walk. He needed to be wheeled around in his wheelchair for most of his adult life. A polio vaccine is developed, and we can clearly see what vaccines can do for the human race. So the polio vaccine introduced in 1955, where there were about 30,000 cases that year, and then once every American young person starts getting that polio vaccine, polio is virtually eradicated in the United States. Yes?
You know that he did not patent his invention so that everybody could get polio?
What a guy.
Yeah. I think...
Another guy that you would want to be familiar with. Oh, you know, and I just threw this other. Here's diphtheria. Another vaccine that most of you guys get when you're little kids is the diphtheria vaccine. Again, it's another disease that used to stricken many thousands of people across the United States every year, and now it's virtually eradicated. All right. Measles is another one. In fact, whenever we look at measles, which you used to have hundreds of thousands of cases every year, and many of those would be dying every year, the vaccine comes around, kids start getting that vaccine, and the measles become a thing of the past. Until the modern day, when larger pockets of some communities decide to not vaccinate their kids or delay vaccinations, then we get measles again. So we are actively living, and I thought of this last week when we were at Wayne State. when it comes to like the food production that we have and the medical capabilities that we have, we are like living in seemingly the only time in human history when some people are actively choosing to produce less farm production on their fields, or to not use some of the medical advancements that society is developing. We're like making these choices. Primarily these come from the wealthiest amongst the society that feel that they just know better. But if you think about things like organic farming or non-GMO foods that are far more expensive and take far more land to produce than traditional farming using all those green revolution advancements, or if you think about the individuals that might choose to not get their children vaccinated, this is a radically new phenomenon happening primarily just in the in wealthier communities in the United States and in Western Europe. But a very interesting change in how human beings are acting. So yeah, we see pockets of measles outbreaks around the United States as more children begin to be unvaccinated. It's certainly an issue that the society has to deal with. Yes, sir.
Are you saying that people in the past used to, like especially wealthy people, used to deviate from the norm as well? Like they used to not follow what general mainstream ideas?
You know what? I don't have enough knowledge to say that they pushed away from them, but I think we're living in an interesting time where there's so much challenge of the scientific community, for example, the medical community. There's so much suspicion of motives, like whether they're just profit motives or there's actual health benefits there. I think we live in a far more suspicious time where people question things far more than they ever used to. Like, the government is lying to me, medical science is lying to me, my doctors are lying to me, they just want to sell more medicine. I think that's a newer phenomenon. But that's bigger than our class can discuss today. Another dramatic change we're going to see in the 20th century is in energy production, especially in two areas, oil and nuclear energy. Oil sees its birth in the early 20th century as a fossil fuel that will start to fuel American industry and American production, and it grows from there. And we can see as human populations grow, the oil production grows. Now, you guys have probably heard something, and I think I've talked about this before, something back in 7th or 8th grade about how we're going to run out of oil on the planet. That won't happen. We just find new places to extract oil. And I don't have it here. We'll actually look right here. That's where I wanted to see that. For example, we're going to talk about global warming in a moment. One benefit, quote unquote, of global warming is that we're having the polar ice caps melt, which makes it easier to extract oil from underneath the Arctic Ocean, which we're starting to do. Which then could possibly make global warming even a more serious issue. But we're not running out of oil. We just have to find more creative places to find it. If we were truly running out of oil, what would be happening to our gas prices? They'd be skyrocketing rather than plummeting like they have over the last few years. Also, nuclear energy. Now, this is a technology in the second half of the 20th century where wicked smart scientists have figured out how to harness the power of the atom and the energy located within the nucleus of an atom as it's holding together its protons and neutrons. If we can figure out how to either split that or squeeze new ones together, it can release a lot of energy. And so we can see that more and more countries of the world are producing more and more nuclear power. France is the poster child for nuclear energy. France, wholly in the 1970s, embraced nuclear power and started putting up nuclear power plants throughout its country, to where today almost all of the energy or electricity that French people use is derived from nuclear power. Now, the United States is the biggest producer of nuclear power, but because we have such a larger population, we're smaller on a per capita basis. We still get most of our energy from traditional sources like coal and natural gas. Yes? Radiation is a problem when it's not contained. Yeah, and like, where do you put your nuclear waste afterwards? That's a little bit of a question that we haven't completely dealt with yet. But As long as you can avoid tsunamis, or if you don't put your nuclear power plants right on the coast where a tsunami could possibly happen, because certainly in Japan they're dealing with that question right now with the Fukushima disaster from now like 4 or 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, a long time.
So anyway, nuclear energy and oil energy dramatically change how the world looks, and I liked this map, or I like this graph here. This goes back all the way to 1500. And where are we getting our energy from? Back in 1500, we got a good chunk of our energy in the form of food that people are eating. Because who's doing the work? It's people. So the energy is like the literal food human beings are consuming. And then food for the animals that are also doing the work, right? And then some of it comes from biomass, like cow patties and such, right? All right, good. And some people use water power and then started to burn some coal. And then we push through into the around 1750, 1800, and what becomes king? Coal. This is the Industrial Revolution. This is why the early 20th century, late 19th century was such a dirty place in American cities and in European cities, because it was all burning coal out of smokestacks. And then today we can see how new a phenomenon this is. Petroleum, that's our oil, natural gas, and then nuclear power coming onto the scene. And then this graph does much the same, but it predicts what might be coming in the future. The age of wood for most of human history, like burning wood to heat our homes, for example. Then the age of coal comes on the scene, and now we're in the age of oil, the age of natural gas. But then these new things on the horizon, like nuclear, biomass, geothermal energy, hydroelectric power, and then what comes in the future, we may not even know that. So energy changes. All right, beautiful. Now we get bummed out. Despite all those advancements, human beings have had dramatic and often negative consequences with their environment. People competing over resources. We totally recognize by the late 20th century, as the population of the world surpasses 7 billion people and it's on its way to 8 billion people, that the resources that we most need to survive are absolutely finite. There's a limit to them. And water is chief among them. I threw on here this picture of the Jordan River, a relatively small river, but I think it highlights best the competition over fresh water sources. Right? We don't want to put Michigan on here for issues of fresh water, because we've got more fresh water than anybody on the planet. But as we've proven in the last couple years, even we can destroy our connection to fresh water, even though we have more of it than anybody. But the Jordan River, a relatively small river in the Middle East. Here's the nation of Israel today, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And then this map shows you where all the little streams are coming from that feed into that Jordan River. So people down in Jordan and people in the West Bank, the Palestinian territory of the West Bank, or people in Israel, the river flows from north to south. So as the river or these streams might be diverted in Lebanon or in Syria or in Israel or in Jordan here in the north, that's leaving less for the people to the south. And this becomes a tremendous issue, especially in an area of the world like Israel and their Arab neighbors that have fierce political divides between them. Water can become a weapon in the war between these peoples. All right, so competition over resources, think about water. Oil is no different. And as we've started to see the effects of global warming starting to reduce Arctic ice flows, we see more availability to start to exploit the Arctic for their oil resources. And now competition amongst oil producers to get at it faster than your competitors. The burning of those fossil fuels, the burning of coal, the burning of oil, that is dramatically increasing in the 20th century, is leading, according to scientific consensus, is leading to warming global temperatures. Now, this is not something that can be disputed, all right? There are really no credible scientists that can't look at data and say that the Earth isn't getting warmer. Where there is some debate, although the vast majority of the scientific community says there is no debate here, but some debate exists, and you're going to certainly hear it in our presidential election. Where the debate exists is whether this is all man-made, partially man-made, or not man-made at all. For example, do you guys know from your study of world history that the planet has cooled and warmed and it had nothing to do with the burning of fossil fuels? Okay, very good. There was a little ice age during the High Middle Ages. There was a little ice age. The planet got a little bit cooler. We know there was a big ice age long before we even started studying this course, right? So there are global fluctuations. If we were in the 1970s, there would be newspaper articles written about how the Earth is getting cooler. Because in the 1970s, you notice how we got this kind of trajectory up, and then you got a few lower lines that pop into the 1970s, and then we bounce right back up, and that continues to this day. So there is some debate whether or not humans are completely involved in this or only partially involved, or maybe not involved at all. Maybe it's just whales farting in the ocean or whatever that's causing all the issue. But the College Board wants me to inform you that global warming is a consequence of humanity's increasing burning of fossil fuels and releasing greenhouse gases. So if you have some political stand where you believe that global warming is not man-made, for one multiple choice question on May 12th, you are going to say global warming is a man-made. No, don't take a stand on that one. Okay? No one will ever know, Luke. You don't have to tell anybody you've compromised your principles to actually believe that human beings have had some negative consequence in the planet that we live in. All right? All right. We are not very good with our water resources. All right? Here is a woman in India fishing water out of a river, and you can see that that river is wildly polluted. And that's not going to look all that different from some coastal areas. This is down in Brazil, where water pollution in the coastal areas of the Atlantic Ocean on the coast of Brazil, in many places that's not like actively cleaned up for the tourist industry, is horribly, horribly polluted. So pollution is threatening our supply of water and our clean air. Deforestation and desertification issues. And these are the same issues that we've talked about going all the way back to the Roman Empire, for example. As the Romans were chopping down more trees, they depleted European forests. Well, now as the population of the world is just to 7.5 billion people, we are accelerating this process. Here is a dramatic snapshot of the Amazon rainforest with a massive hunk of it carved out. We're carving out land to increase farming areas. We're carving out land to gain the lumber and building materials for the increased populations. Yes?
If deforestation is increasing, why didn't it show on the map that are
That we have. Well, it's not all being used, deforestation is not all being used for farming. Much of it is just clear cutting for the lumber resources. And also, notice what's going on in our community. Like, the house that I live in used to sit atop a potato farm at 25 and Romeo Plain. They grow a lot of potatoes out there. My subdivision is called Penzine Farms. You live in Penzine Farms. Penzine owned like a bunch of potato farms in our area. So Penzine Farm subdivision used to be where Penzine Potato Farms used to be. So, yes, there are new areas falling under cultivation, just as population expanses are taking old areas that used to be cultivated and turning it into subdivisions with McMansions and such. All right? Like, when I was younger, Lakeside Mall, if you started going too far north of Lakeside Mall, like to 21, 22, it was all farmland. There was nothing there. Now it's all subdivisions. Excellent. Now it's all subdivisions. All right. So here's guys, quiet please. Here's the Amazon rainforest. Here's the Amazon rainforest. And we still see that much of it is still untouched. But the amount that we are pulling out, and we see deforestation up to 1997, and then how this red, how we're just accelerating it just in the last 10 years after 97. This is a trend that does not seem to be slowing down. We also are driving a number of species extinct. Extinction rates of species on the planet are increasing at a dramatic rate. And this is directly correlated with the increase in the human population. As there are more of us, and we need more space, and we need more resources, we are starting to take away the space and the resources that were relied on by the natural world. And more species are becoming endangered and going extinct than human beings have really ever been the cause of before. All right? Wah, wah, wah. This is depressing now. Okay, some good news. Some good news. Human populations are living longer than we've ever lived before. All right? The population of the world is larger than it has ever been before. But the 20th century will show us that there are still threats to those populations. And still some diseases that might be a thing of the past to the wealthier world, like malaria, can absolutely be a disaster for the poorer parts of the world, like Africa and Latin America. Diseases like malaria and tuberculosis, things that used to strike on a much wider swath across the planet, are now largely relegated to poorer communities. Yes?
Yeah, kind of cool. When my dad went to Sudan and stuff, they did this thing where like they live in a house, they still have to like kind of have tents around them when they sleep so that like
Yeah, they have mosquito nets. And that's what's an incredible thing is like what can be the difference between life and death for a little kid in Africa is whether his family has a mosquito net around his bed. It's something that we certainly don't even have to think about. Although the Zika virus, my wife's freak-out level is starting to grow. And these things kind of ebb and flow over time. And, you know, maybe at the beginning of the year, weren't we talking, or was it last year, that we were talking about Ebola in West Africa. And that was a big scare in the 90s, and then it kind of disappeared for a while and then popped back on the scene. Well, why are we so freaked out? Because we have issues like this from the early 20th century. In 1918, there was an epidemic of what was known as the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu epidemic, which is going to start in Europe and spread to the United States and really around the world, is going to be a disaster in terms of the human toll. In fact, there will be more human beings, and the AP likes this question as well, guys. More human beings will die from the Spanish flu epidemic than from the First World War. So for Europeans that were destroyed by the First World War, you can imagine that the Spanish flu is just adding like insult to injury there, right?
Just rubbing it in.
And then the AIDS virus. Now, this is something that was a big deal when I was younger, and I don't know how much you guys hear about it. And in fact, I think it's very little. Like it's not. When I was a kid in the late 1980s and into the 1990s, AIDS was commonplace. Hearing about it on the news every night, and the AIDS epidemic, and not really having any solution to the issue. And for the United States, the problem is still there. We understand it far better than we ever did before. There are better treatments than we once had for it, but the problem is still there. But it's nothing like the problem that is seen in sub-Saharan Africa. So AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa is destroying populations. And I wanted to show you this. And again, be familiar with this concept in a graph. And I know it's a little hard to see. These are what are called population pyramids. All right? Sometimes the College Board throws something like this in an individual question where you have to look at a graph and interpret a couple things from it. Or they might throw it in as a source in a DBQ. So be familiar with the population pyramid. We have on the right side of the pyramid, female populations. On the left side of the pyramid, male populations. Going up the middle, we have ages. And then depending on how long that line is, how many people are at that particular age. So we can see in South Africa in 1990, we see between 0 and 4 years old, there were almost 2.5 million girls.
What?
Between 0 and 4 years old, there were almost 2.5 million boys. A population pyramid that looks like this, with a very skinny top and a very wide base and a relatively stable slope going up on either side. This is what a poor country in the 20th century would have looked like, with relatively high birth rates. All right? You have a very fat bottom when you have high birth rates. All right? Then, by 2005, we see the AIDS epidemic start to hit South Africa and start to decimate South African populations. And what that means is we're going to start seeing the death, especially of women, and especially we start to see the deaths of women in childbearing years, resulting in fewer children being born. All right? So you see this weird, like, kind of cutoff. And then we fast forward that to 2010, and we can start to see an even more dramatic strangulation of the adult population because of HIV and AIDS, and still fewer children being born commensurate to what it once was. All right?
Is that a good impact or a bad impact?
This is a disastrous impact. People dying, people not around, and children being left as orphans as their parents die of the disease. Or children being born to mothers with the disease, so now the children have the disease as well. So
Thinking about in terms of population demographics, like you have too many children in your country, you can't really, it'd be like the same thing, you can't really take care of them all because you don't have all the resources.
yeah.
I'm talking about like general demographic impact.
If you can just look at the numbers and forget that there are human beings behind the numbers, I guess you can say yay. But it's hard to not think about the human toll that is being wrought. And this is repeated throughout sub-Saharan Africa, where the AIDS epidemic has been the most disastrous. America does not escape scot-free, though, from health issues in the 20th century. Now, here is an American population pyramid. An American population pyramid, 1970, 1990, 2010. Now, what we can see here is a couple different things going on. First and foremost, now, you could adjust these numbers to make ours like a little fatter or skinnier like we just saw. But we see in 1970, you got this like fatter chunk of kids who are between like 5 and 20 years old. What do we call those kids that are between like 5 and 20 years old in 1970? Very good. Those are the children of the baby boom. Those are those kids in the United States that are born after World War II up to like the very late 60s. The baby boom generation. Guys came home from war, there were some resources, the economy was generally pretty strong, and there was a larger number of kids being born. Baby boomers themselves, as baby boomers got older, they didn't want to have as many kids. There wasn't a second baby boom. They wanted to go out on their boats, and they wanted to go on vacations, and they realized that kids are expensive. And so the baby boomers had fewer children. And so we see, after the baby boom generation, like a skinnier bottom. Baby boomers themselves didn't have as many children. But the baby boomers are still there. Here's the baby boomers. Here's the baby boomers. And now here's the baby boomers. In 2010, these people are getting into their 60s. And pretty soon they're going to be in their 70s and 80s, and then they're going to be in their 90s. What we're experiencing in the Western world in the United States is because of the medical advancements and cures for things that we used to not have cures for, we keep old people around much longer than they used to be, which has dramatic economic and social consequences for a country like ours. How do we afford health care for people as they get older and older? How do we afford Social Security programs that have long been established but are becoming more challenging as baby boomers have fewer and fewer children? Also, new diseases are on the rise, even in Western societies that tend to be more wealthy. Heart disease. It's the #1 killer in the United States, really? By far. By far. People dying of heart attacks and heart disease. Much of the heart disease, guys, remember, this is a decadent disease. This is a disease that comes because we consume too much nasty food that we shouldn't be eating, all right? Hypocrite right here, I know, but we just consume too much of it. And so heart disease is a serious threat to current populations, even in Western societies. And then a new disease, relatively new on the scene, that wasn't going to be talked about in the early 20th century, but now is starting to rear its head as a cause of death, and that's Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's disease isn't an issue when people don't live much past 60, 70 years old. But as human populations are aging, as we are curing people of cancers that used to kill them, we are seeing more and more people deal with the effects of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And that is now starting to take more and more lives. When other diseases used to take people. Like, for example, my father, we Dobie men have rough hearts. My father's had a heart attack, and he's had a quadruple bypass, and he's had all their other kinds of heart procedures. Quadruple, yeah, they had to clear out like 4 different arteries, right? It's nasty stuff. He had that back when he was like 49, 50 years old, his first one. He's now 67. He's had prostate cancer. He's had lung cancer. Yeah. Still going strong, though, right? He's had a lot of things going on that he's had to deal with. If my dad were alive in 1950 going through these issues, like his father was, he'd have been dead. Or my mom's dad, dead of heart disease in the 1960s. These things are, we survive them, all right? We're able to get past them. But a consequence is we're getting an aging population that we have to care for and that are very expensive to care for, and we're now starting to deal with things that we used to not have to deal with, all right? Guys, the 20th century is ripe with changes in human societies, all right? So if you guys are getting any kind of continuity and change over time, and they're including the 20th century, you guys have a ton of changes that you can be talking about, right?